I am a 23-year-old half Cherokee woman, and I am from Georgia, USA. At the time that this story took place, my fiancé and I was living on a large farm in Maryland. We didn't use the farm, but we were renting a small house on the property, and we were free to come and go around the grounds. I was only 19 at the time this took place, and the only residents in our home were myself, my fiancé, our cat, and dog. Our cat was a lunatic barn cat that I had rescued because I can't say no to animals that need help, and our day was for my loyal pit bull, who was a sweet, cuddly, scaredy cat. She weighed about 75 pounds and was afraid of her own shadow. Our farm was situated on about 20 acres of land, and our driveway was about a half a mile long. So when I would get home from work, my loyal dog and I would go for a walk, and I usually brought my fiancé with me. Not that I was afraid to go out alone, just that he spends too much time playing video games. Our driveway was a 12-mile-long road through woods and farms until it finally reconnected with civilization, so it was safe to say that we were far from other people, except for our landlord, of course. The first mile was through open farmland, followed by a brief patch of forest, and then about half a mile of wheat fields, and then solid forest for 2 more miles. Now that you have a bit of the layout, on to the creepy bit. So it started like any other weekday evening. My fiancé and I returned home from work to our happy cottage and happy pets. Harley, our dog, was frantic to go for a walk, so I quieted her and changed into walking clothes and asked my fiancé if he would like to join me. He had gotten home shortly after me and said that he had seen one of the coyotes that we have around close to the field by our house. But as you may know, coyotes are mostly scavengers, especially out here on the East Coast, so I wasn't too worried, and I am very capable of defending myself. I called him a wuss and then told Harley that we could go and that we would be fine without him. Laughing to myself, we left the cottage and started walking toward the driveway. The sun was going down and the October air had started to get a chill to it, and it rustled through the cornfields next to our long driveway. The corn was about 6 feet tall at this point in the year and impossible to see through, so I assumed that my fiancé was trying to scare me because there was no way he could have seen a coyote in this field. Harley was enjoying her time in the field, tearing in and out of the corn stalks on our walk up the driveway, and I knew that, with as big of a coward as she was, that she would alert me to any danger very quickly and by running away. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the sun had set and the moon, which had already come out, was shining high about the fields. It wasn't quite full, but it provided enough light that I didn't need to use my flashlight or Harley's collar light. We turned left down the road and proceeded across the first section of the field. The first field was soybean, and if you don't know what they are relatively short plants that nothing but a rabbit could hide in, and off in the distance I spotted a few deer, but nothing alarming, so we relaxed and enjoyed our walk through the night air. I would throw a stick and Harley would bring it back. Typical dog and owner stuff. We reached the first small section of trees, and Harley stopped and bumped into my leg, letting me know that there was something ahead. It wasn't a coyote or a deer, but there was a rabbit that had been hit by a passing car and was still struggling. As much as I hate to say this, there was no way it was going to live, and honestly, it's probably what drew the coyote pack in. I knelt by it, and by using my knife quickly, I put it out of its misery as my family had taught me, and let it pass into the next life. Feeling sad but somewhat relieved that all we had encountered was a handful of deer and that poor rabbit, we continued our walk and passed into the next field. This was a wheat field, and the wheat was about ready for harvest, so it was quite tall and hard to see through. The field was quiet though, and Harley didn't do anything, so I figured that the coyotes had passed on if there had been any at all. Now this is the part you have been waiting for, and I don't know what it was, but here it is. We rounded the corner of the field and into an area with wheat on our left and forest on our right, and the air seemed to go still. Harley got closer to me and I heard rustling in the wheat field. I saw 3 tails circling back toward the forest. Coyotes. The eastern coyotes are small, but in a pack, they get pretty ballsy. Harley raised her heckles and I yelled, "Get out of here! Go on! Fuck off!" as loud as I could, and the coyotes, startled, scattered off into the trees. I decided to turn around and get out of there before they decided to regroup because I am brave, but I am not going to walk into a darkened forest with a coyote pack and a cowardly pit bull. We turned to head back and again I heard the rustling in the wheat. A confused coyote? I thought it must be, but no, Harley was standing stock still staring at the wheat and I whistled for her to come with me, that high-pitched ear-piercing two-fingered whistle. That snapped her out of it for a second when my whistle was returned from inside the wheat. All of a sudden the family legends I had heard came flooding back to me and I expected to see a tall thin creature emerge, but nothing did. I didn't smell rotting meat or feel a sense of dread. Instead I was transfixed with fear and curiosity. I whistled again and the whistle was returned, very human sounding, but at the same time not. Against my better judgment, I said, "Hello," and my voice replied, "Hello." My hand was on my knife and I said, "Show yourself." Silence. No bugs, no coyotes, no Harley noises, just my breath. Slowly the rustling started again and I turned on my flashlight. I shined it on the wheat field and what I saw confuses me to this day. Animal eyes. The green-yellow reflection of light was cast back at me, but what it was connected to didn't make any sense. There was a girl, no more than 14 or 16, crouched in the wheat. She wore what I think must have been some kind of deerskin or fur, but she was naked otherwise. She was very thin and looked as though her skin had never seen sunlight. Her hair was long and tangled with wheat and leaves. Under any other circumstances I would have said she was beautiful, but at that moment, she was terrifying. We stared at each other for what must have been a solid minute or so, but felt like much longer until I heard the unmistakable coyote howl from the forest. Both of our heads snapped toward the noise and immediately I heard her take off through the wheat and toward the sound. At that same moment, Harley took off toward our house and I went after her. We didn't stop running until we got to the driveway and then I stopped, not wanting my fiancée to know I was running away from something. I could still hear the howling in the distance and we started walking at a brisk pace. We made it back to the cottage with no further problems, and I didn't tell my fiancé about it, not wanting him to go out looking for her with the gun. She hadn't hurt me, so I didn't think it was right to hunt her. Later on, in the middle of the night, I was awoken by the sound of the coyotes outside our cottage. This wasn't unusual, and I wondered if she was with them. When I was coming home from work about a month later, I had to slam on my brakes for something in the road. It was dark, and when my headlights hit it, its eyes reflected green and yellow. It was a large coyote, and it just stared at my car for a moment and ran off into the woods. I know this sounds crazy, but I still wonder if that was her. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek and usually only takes me about 25 to 30 minutes. I've made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There was always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I tried to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure of what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation. I whispered, "Hello?" hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips. I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. Hello? I started to breathe too fast. My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I might faint. Hello? My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply, as my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. Hello? 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 It repeated. Stop it! I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there was no typical forest sounds. There were no bugs, no frogs or crickets, nothing. I stood there terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. Stop it, it mimicked back. I'd had enough and was willing my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched in horror as a deer head with huge antlers protruded from the brush. As it came further out and stood up on twos, I took off. I flew out of those woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room and laid down and thought about what happened. My mother came in at some point and asked me if everything was all right. I replied yes, and that I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I might have been afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. This terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake listening to every little sound in the night. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds quieted. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers up over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. Hello? I cried. It was all I could do. Hello? Stop it! It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said, but then it did something new. It called my name. Amy? My mother's voice. Amy! Amy, come here! Hello? Stop it! My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I had said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature they called a Yi-Now-Lu-Shi, he who goes on all fours, or a Skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with attributes it required, that it had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, that I would always have to be careful. Last night I heard scratching on my window, then a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said in my mother's voice. At one point it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far, like, Amy. It tried to get me to come outside or to open the door and let it in my house. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is it seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I could take that. I am an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan. and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. This is a long story, so bear with me. On one particular hot summer weekend, my boyfriend, let's call him Tony, my older brother, let's call him Brad, and a couple of friends, including me, decided we were going to go camping for the weekend since it was such a nice warm week. Tony's parents owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But being stupid teenagers, we didn't really think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teens would. After being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had brought tons of alcohol and weed to last us for the weekend so we wouldn't be bored since we had no service and only movies to watch. After it got around 12 a.m. and was pitch black, we had a huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony. As we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, we were so distracted that we didn't notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes onto one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all intoxicated and high at that time. Eventually our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. "Hey dude, you alright?" he asked Brad. Silence. Brad didn't reply or even make any movements that would indicate he heard him. After that, I started to get scared as well as the other 2 girls there. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first to catch on that he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods. I turned my head and followed his gaze the best I could, and when I finally caught on to what he was staring at, my heart dropped. There, right there, was at first look a dog. At least that's what I thought. It was someone's dog that wandered off. But then my brain kicked in, and I realized there were no neighbors for miles. So how could there be a dog? My mind started to race while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak or even move. In one motion, this thing stood up tall, and when I say tall, I mean gigantic. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. Everyone saw it then. How could you not? The other 2 girls and the other boy with us gasped as they finally realized why my brother was still as a stick. No one moved for what seemed like 12 hours. Tony was the first to talk. "No, tail," he mumbled. No one heard what he said but Brad, and I swear to you when I say his eyes widened as big as pan saucers. That freaked me out immediately. "What did you say?" one of the girls asked. "It has no tail," he hissed at her. My heart stopped beating. He was right. There was no tail on this thing. Suddenly, my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing was. Now I understood why my brother was basically shitting his pants. This thing was a Skinwalker. My instincts kicked in right then and there, but before I could nope the hell out of there, the thing let off a terrible stench like rotting meat before letting out an inhuman scream. The sound was enough to scare everyone. My brother was the first to get up from his chair and started shouting in our native language at the creature, while I told everyone to go get inside. No one questioned me when they saw just how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He had never seen me so scared before, so he knew it was a bad situation. We all hurried into the cabin with my brother still shouting native words at the creature, which seemed to keep it at bay while giving us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door, turned off all the lights, and grabbed a special ash from the kitchen counter. He started throwing that ash at every window and door while chanting. Of course, he had everyone freaked out and basically in tears at that moment. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time. All of us were still in shock. He grabbed our dad's pistol and kept it close to him for hours. Everyone was too shaken up to even question what had happened. We must have eventually fallen asleep because I woke up to my brother packing all our stuff into 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had native family, and we knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back. Maybe not alone. Before we left, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up. To this day, we still haven't explained exactly what had happened that night to our friends.